Okay, so we're live. Welcome, everyone. We're very happy to be here today, and I'm very honored for the opportunity to be moderating this panel today. We have some amazing panelists who are going to be sharing with us their experiences, some of their achievements that they have gone through, their opinions, their outlooks, and we're very fortunate to be here to listen to them, to learn from them, and to see what they discuss between each other. So to start with that, to introduce myself, my name is Babalwa. I am currently a student in my last year. I was also the founder and the president of the European Arab Student Union, and I helped a lot in political activism throughout the last few years by helping students in different places across Europe, most notably in Spain, which I am currently based. And now to learn a bit about our panelists. So let's start with Tahil.
Thanks, Laith. Hi, everyone. My name is Tahil Sharma. My pronouns are he and they. And I serve as the Faith Work Director at the National LGBTQ Task Force. Happy to be here.
Okay, maybe Dana now.
Sure. So, hello, everybody. I'm beyond happy that I got the chance to be part of this conference. My name is Dana Osaily, Palestinian, living in the West Bank and working at the Palestinian Monetary Authority, which mimics the central bank in any other country. And yeah, again, happy to be here.
Thank you, Dana. Babs?
Sure, thanks, Laith. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be joined by such wonderful panelists. I'm really excited for the discussion that's about to happen here today. My name is Babalwa Ngcongolo, but as Laith has said, some people call me Babs. I am the Executive Director of Changeways Center for Collaborative Justice, which is an organization that focuses on the ways that we interrogate and practice justice, particularly in our age as young people. I am also part of the Cape Town Interfaith Initiative, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Board of the Charter for Compassion.
Thank you. And finally, Juan.
Thank you. Very happy to be here. My name is Juan Diego Beltrán. I am from Bogota, Colombia, and I am the executive director of an organization called Pensamiento, Espiral, which we focus on mostly is impact on climate storytelling through a focus of on traditional knowledge of the global south and decolonizing our relationship to nature. And yes, I'm very, very happy to be here today.
Thank you for that. So now let's start with our discussions. First of all, it's obvious that all of you work in great things. You've had an amazing impact on the environment that you're in, and you continue to do so and will continue to do so in the future. So, based off of that, we can see that each of you works at the intersection of identity, liberation, and justice. So, could you begin by sharing what inspired your journey into advocacy and how compassion shapes your approach to this kind of work? Tahel, maybe if we can start with you.
Sure. Happy to go first, even though I had a slight feeling I was going to go first. So my story begins sort of, growing up as a multi-faith kid in Los Angeles. I grew up in a family that was both Hindu and Sikh. And growing up with those faith traditions actually really grounded me in this understanding that compassion is actually at the forefront of everything that you do. It's not a separate value that you practice only in specific settings. It's something that drives every decision that you make at home, at work, with your friends, with loved ones, or even with strangers. And when you grow up in an environment where that kind of compassion is sort of key to your existence, key to your being, it's really hard to not be able to share that compassion with others that may not share the same opinions towards you. And it became very clear over time that those divisions were a key part of why I think my compassion became not just something that I joined with my faith identity, but something that I wanted to do as a part of the work that I do in advocacy. In 2012, particularly, there was an attack that took place against the Sikh community in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, in the United States, and a white supremacist who was trying to target the Muslim community, thinking he was going to a mosque, actually entered a gurdwara, or a Sikh temple of worship, and attacked the community during their services. 7 people were killed, and the biggest question that came out of the whole conversation was, who is this community, and why do they look like Muslims even though they don't identify as Muslim? And that became a really big problem in terms of telling the story of who our community was, being able to understand that you don't get to target another community just because you're protecting another one. But I actually turned to my text to consider, like, how should we be showing up in moments of injustice like this for our own? And two terms that we call God are nidho and nirved, which defines God as the one without fear and without hatred. So if God is the one that's actually showing up as the most compassionate among us and the one that created us, we have a responsibility to be compassionate to each other. So that happened 13 years ago, and that was my launching point into actually doing interfaith work through a social justice lens. It got me involved in so many different movements around racial justice, the environment, uplifting Indigenous people, calling out the chaos that's being purported by major countries and corporations, and everything in between. So that's what brings me here today.
Thank you, Tahil. And we're lucky to have you. And obviously, your upbringing, your experiences are unique, and very few people in the world may have had them. And we're very fortunate that these experiences have given us you, who you as a person continue to help and continue to put out the best into the world. So, thank you. Babs, maybe if you'd like to share now.
Sure. I think pretty similarly to Tahil, I think there are two really important moments to consider, as is, I think, for most people. I think the first is, how I was raised and where I was raised. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa. I grew up on the eastern coast of South Africa in a small town called East London. And my parents, I think, influenced a lot of who I am. My mother is a magistrate. My father is a pastor. And so I grew up in a home where the idea of justice and faith was constantly within our conversations, within the way that we were raised. And I think for me, a real moment that made me see myself as accountable as a person who's living within the world, to create and to be part of and participate in a system that shifts things and changes things, was when I started university. I went to the University of Cape Town, and I went to the University of Cape Town at the height of what was called Fees Must Fall. And Fees Must Fall, which is now also referred to as the Fallist movement, was a decolonial movement. It was a movement that really asked us to criticize and think about the academy and how it is used as a tool to oppress and suppress what we really should be learning and knowing. So it's a form of epistemicide that we were really engaging with. And I think for me, what really happened was it took me into a deep space of grief, right? And so I think I really do this work from a place of grief. It's a loss of the systems. It's a loss of the culture, the language, the ways of being that could have been had we not interrogated or had been influenced by colonial powers within South Africa. And so those are the things that have really within me made me question what happens within the world, within my own world. And I think has also really pushed me to think about my responsibility within society, and my responsibility to decenter white colonial power within our lives and the way that we interact with the world. So that is a little bit of my entrance into this world, but it really is, I think, and I think we can't ignore this fact, is that it really centered in grief, and it's the grief that I think we're witnessing happening across the world today as well.
Thank you, Babs. And I love what you said about grief. I think, unfortunately, one of the strongest driving factors is grief. And during our activism, during our movements, during our collective action. And I think it's because of that grief that we try to do something that to kind of make sure that the future of people, the future generations who are working towards the betterment of our community and our world, are doing so instead of a place from grief, from a place of love, perhaps. And for us, unfortunately, that's the current driving factor, and it's a powerful one, I think. And it's definitely one that I think we should never forget for now, and one that we have to hold on to, because it really does tell us how much we need to do to help develop our world for the future, how much we need compassion to do so. So, Juan, maybe we can hear from you now.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll try to be brief because it's a very long story. But so I was born in Bogota, Colombia. But for several reasons, my family had to migrate to different countries of Latin America while I was growing up. And we spent quite a bit of time in Argentina. And Argentina is a beautiful country, which I have a very special connection to. But unfortunately, in certain parts of the country, there is a great issue of racism and discrimination in very specific contexts, and that is related to the fact that the majority of the population is Caucasian of European descent who had migrated into Latin America and Argentina during the 20th century. So in that sense, it was a very homogeneous society, and the context in which I arrived was, for that reason as well, very close to foreigners and people of different ethnic backgrounds. And what happened there was that I actually faced a lot of discrimination, and actually like literal. It went beyond bullying, in my opinion. It was physical and verbal abuse for being from Colombia because of very complicated cultural stereotypes and racial stereotypes that exist to this day. And it was a time that really marked me because I normalized it, and I thought that I wanted to be less like myself. I started like phasing out my accent, phasing out the way I portrayed myself, and I related to Colombia and to my family and to our cultural and traditions. I was very ashamed of who I was, and I wanted to be more like them and less so like myself and the people from my country. And that was very hard to deal with for a very long time. And another fact that it's important in the context of Latin America, there is a lot of proximity and support for anything that is American. So we tend to idolize America a lot in Latin America. And what that led to was actually me feeling like I was very inferior to anything that wasn't Western, anything that wasn't white or American. And that was very painful because I was very ashamed of my identity. Very fortunately for me, I had the opportunity to study international relations in Mexico City. That, to anyone who has ever had the chance to visit, it's such a beautiful city, such a melting pot of culture. And I had the blessing to meet a lot of people that while I was studying international relations that taught me and guided me into this concept of decolonization that kept popping up everywhere. I had these amazing teachers that helped me like re-signify the history of my country, the history of Latin America, and that helped me to really see through the reality of the power structures that had been oppressing people in the global South and in Latin America for ages and for centuries. And that was when I realized, everything, the corporations, the people that we were taught to look up to, the countries that we were taught to look up to, were actually, responsible for such a great amount of suffering. And it was like a breaking point for me also to realize that many of this suffering that extended, it not only extended to people, but it also extended to nature itself, and to the planet. And, the same structures of oppression, of discrimination that were responsible for so much human suffering were also responsible for, extractivism and, the climate crisis that we're currently facing. And for me, that was like a huge breaking point in which I started realizing more and more that we couldn't fight the climate crisis, and there will never be climate justice as long as there is no end to colonialism. As long as we don't stop it, there will never be a reciprocal relationship to nature. And that's when I started, getting really involved in working with local communities and indigenous communities and revisiting the history of my family and learning so many things I had no idea of the political participation my grandparents had taken during very complicated times of violence in Colombia. And I felt very proud, and I started digging deeper into those roots. And that's when I started working in Pensamiento Espiral to try to share stories about decolonization and decolonizing our relationship to nature through different perspectives and different narratives from the global South, from Latin America, and from people who have lived and resisted against centuries of oppression and still endure with their cultures and their love for nature in particular. So that's a bit of the history.
Thank you, Juan. It was lovely to hear all of it, and for myself, even imagine you in all of it. And one thing I would comment on all of that is that we're very fortunate for your character, because it was very unfortunate that you had to experience racism and all of those horrible things that you did growing up. But the biggest outcome of that is how you kind of took it and made yourself a better person. And you kind of ingested it and gave out something good into the world. Because in a lot of times, bad experiences such as this, instead they create more hatred, and they create other forms of extremism, other forms of racism, which unfortunately only cause more suffering in the world. And I think the true test is when we have someone who can take a bad experience, who can take unfortunate incidents that have happened to them, and then kind of turn that into something good to make sure that it doesn't happen to anyone else, to kind of make sure that it no longer belongs in the world instead of spreading more of it. So thank you for that. And finally, now, Dana.
Okay, so I'll give a brief of my background and what inspired me to advocate, and also to advocate with compassion. So, as a Palestinian who was born in Hebron in the West Bank, and I'd say the southern part of the West Bank in Palestine, Hebron is the only city in the West Bank where illegal settlements, Israeli settlements, are at the heart of the city. So I think I lived my daily life surrounded by checkpoints, restrictions, no free access to movement, no free access to good education, good healthcare, and even much more. Being deprived of the very basic human rights and needs. Made me feel a lot of grief, not a bit, at first, because I felt like I did not have equal rights, just like any other person in this world. And I think this is the number one motive for me that inspired me to advocate. And just starting again from the very beginning, I think that even when I was born in Hebron, I was born during a military curfew in the Second Intifada. And even my mother says the act of bringing a Palestinian into life is an act of defiance, is an act of resistance. And I knew from the very beginning that being Palestinian means that I have to carry both the kind of struggle and hope at once. And, the kind of upbringing, my family, and also all the military hurdles and the political escalations that I have lived throughout my life inspired me to even join programs since I was a teen, to advocate, to voice my own story, my own pain, but with respect and compassion. So when I was 15, I joined a political camp in the United States called Seeds of Peace. And I found myself in spaces where people have never heard a Palestinian before. I mean, that was a political camp where people had to be divided into groups and just go through political conflicts. You see Israelis, you see Palestinians, you see Indians and Pakistanis, and people from all around the world. And at that moment, when I was 15, I realized that people do not have the faintest idea about what the life of a Palestinian in the West Bank or even in Gaza looks like. And they were surprised. And at that moment, I think that this experience helped me realize that sometimes even compassionate leadership means that it's not confrontation, it's even conversation and understanding. It's like creating understanding where there's ignorance. And I realized that people, it's not that they're like intentional, but they don't know anything about our reality. And I think that was the motive for me to advocate also as well. And growing up also, I have joined the UGrad program, which is an exchange program during university. And I was also involved in conversations with students from all around the world, and also particularly from the United States. And I realized as well that they do not also know anything about Palestine, about us, the suffering and all the things that we go through in our daily lives. They even used to confuse Palestine with Pakistan at first. So I felt I first felt a bit dehumanized, as not acknowledged. But then I think that I used my own story and I voiced my pain, and I talked about our culture and about my identity. And I think I'm trying to do so with compassion. And
Thank you, Dana. And I wanted to say thank you for your continued advocacy. I share many of your points in more ways than one. And moreover than that, I want to say that the strength that it takes to do so from someone in your position is incredible. And thank you for doing that, because I can tell you how I know a lot of people who have unfortunately been scared in many different times of their life to speak out, to actually do something, to take action. And it has a lot to do with the environment of fear that they live in. The fact that at any given moment, occupation soldiers might burst into your house and imprison you should they want to, and they'll hold you without charges. They'll hold you without any rule of law or policies, because they don't see you as equal. They don't see that laws even apply to you. And the fact that you're able to persevere through that and to continue to advocate for peace, for compassion, and to do that with respect is an achievement of its own. So thank you. So now, building off of that, we want to move on to our next question, which is about decolonization. So decolonization is often spoke about in systemic terms, as to do with policy, education, or activism. But how do you personally, each of you, define decolonization, and what does it look like to practice that within your own personal communities? Juan, maybe we can start with you for this question.
Great, sure. So for me, in my line of work and in my experience, I see decolonization based on the life story that I just shared. Is for me, it means like acquiring and spreading knowledge that will help liberate us from misinformation, prejudice, and from all the indoctrination with which the global north and the global power structures have perpetuated inequality and division within our own societies, seeking to undermine things such as self-determination. So for me, it means that is how can we share stories, how can we share information to unlearn many of the things that we have learned about ourselves, about other peoples who have been colonized, and we have only heard traditional media's perspective about things, about history. So that's part of the what it means to me. But also I see it, again in very personal terms, because I acknowledge I have grown in very westernized contexts. For me, it also means it's a continuous path of unlearning. I don't think that I can get to say, hey, I am completely decolonized. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think it's a path that is not linear, in which we have to continue, and in my case, choosing collectivism over individualism, and horizontal relationships, horizontal and reciprocal relationships over extractive ones. And I think it's a process, and I think it also means in this day and age, with so much suffering that we're seeing, and with the ongoing genocide and everything that has been happening, it means to be an ally, and to know that the colonized people, the people who are facing directly these forms of oppression in this very moment, are the ones we should follow their lead, and we should just support and trust and be absolutely compassionate about their leadership, and have them set the terms of their own liberation, such as be supportive of that, and not impose our worldviews or opinions on what that might entail.
I agree, and thank you so much for all of that, Juan. It's a beautiful perspective, and I hope that you continue to implement it every day in all of your work. Babs, maybe you can share.
Yeah, I want to start by saying that I distrust. I don't want to say I dislike, but I distrust the word decolonial. And I distrust it because it does this very insidious thing of still centering colonization and centering colonialism. And so when I approach the conversation of quote unquote decoloniality, I think my first question is, who are we centering within that conversation? And what does that mean about how we can then interrogate that specific thing? My biggest issue is around us really unpacking what colonialism is, right? The colonialism that we live in now really is about white supremacist culture. And within that white supremacist culture, it's just this ideology that says that even though we live in a world with a plethora of cultures and ways of beings and ways of speaking and ways of interacting, of ways of thinking about family and thinking about success, we determine all of that based on a one specific culture, and that is this white, particularly Western idea of what success and language and cultural, whatever is culturally appropriate is. And so I think where we need to start always, and where I always start, is by thinking through what does it mean to decenter that, to take that out of a conversation completely. What does it really mean to reclaim our own cultures and put them at the center? It means when I enter a room and I introduce myself and I'm running a session, I start by saying this is my name, but then I also go and extend it and I start to introduce my ancestors into the room and into the space. I do that because that is a practice within my culture that within white culture I would not be able or allowed to do without people feeling uncomfortable. So for me, it's really this practice of how do we break comfort within that specific cultural lens. But also, I think for me, it really is about a very personal practice of understanding what colonization, or what happens at the intersection of colonization and identity, and how much the process of colonization is actually a stripping of individual identity. Something that Juan said earlier about being told that you are not good enough, being told that your language is not good enough, being told that the way you present is not good enough. I mean, those are things that we need to constantly be working at personally to really reclaim ourselves. It reminds me of the work of Steve Biko within South Africa, who was an anti-apartheid activist. And one of the movements that he championed was this Black consciousness movement. And it's such a simple idea, but such a dangerous one, which says that within my identity, I am worthy. I am perfect within it, right? I don't need to assimilate in order to have success. In fact, assimilation is this one thing that can destroy who I am. And I think it really starts from that conversation of who do you see yourself as a person who exists possibly outside of this white supremacist culture. And then secondly, it really is about interrogating how you then use your time, how you use your attention, how you use your money, right? Where you spend, because all of those are subliminal ways in which we are supporting genocides. We are supporting supremacist culture. We are supporting ideologies that really do not coincide or align with our ideas of justice and liberation. So all of those things are, to me, are practices of intentionally really sifting through our conditioning so that we can get to the truth of who we are and we can build the truth that we want to see within the world.
Thank you, Babs. And that was amazing. That was one of, I'm just privileged, honestly, to have heard that. And yeah, I just want to say that I agree with it completely. I think we live in a world, unfortunately, where the metrics for success, the metrics for happiness, the metrics for beauty, the metrics for most of the things in our life have been set by a colonial regime, which basically now enforces itself upon us through soft power with the exasperation of social media, for example, with different things. We feel the need to conform to all of that. And I can tell you, as a student at an international university, I have seen so many different students who have unfortunately abandoned their own culture, their own uniqueness, their own identity in an effort to conform with their surroundings, to follow that sort of Western white colonial ideals that have been set, that have been kind of shown and taught to us that this is what you need, this is how it is, and this is what you should continue to do. And I think there is a very important need to break away from that comfort and to kind of acknowledge and liberate our identity itself from its prison that it's in right now. So thank you. Dana?
So speaking in the context of Palestine, decolonialization begins with something that is very concrete, I think, which is, to me, ending the occupation of Palestine. Sometimes activists use the word decolonization metaphorically, but for us, it's very important. It's not a metaphor, it's our daily reality. It means freedom of movement, access to our land, our resources, and the right to live without military control. But beyond that, this word is also about healing from the ways occupation shapes how we see ourselves. It's about reclaiming our story, our language, our pride, our ability to imagine a future, not just to just live with a survival mode on. And in my community, decolonization looks like people refusing to give up normal life. You know, when students insist to go to their universities, to their schools, even with checkpoints, when families are rebuilding their houses that had been demolished, and when artists are documenting, when economists like myself working to strengthen the Palestinian institutions in the West Bank, so that we can all stand on our feet. These acts may seem small, but collectively, I can say that they represent the ongoing struggle to live freely and, of course, with dignity. So when I speak of decolonization, I mean both the tangible, ending military occupation, and the spiritual part of it as well. Reclaiming our full humanity, because for us, liberation is not an abstract idea. It's the right to live, to move, to dream, and to exist on our own terms.
Thank you, Dana. And I share that idea of decolonization with you, and I hope to be a part of it one day. I hope that we both will be, and that we'll be able to live in that future. We uh, we always say in our culture that some of the elder people in our culture always say that I hope that God gives me life until I can see Palestine be free. And I hope that it will come soon enough for our generation, for the older generation to experience it, to live in that state, and to take forth ourselves as youth the responsibility of to continuing the decolonization spiritually, after that culturally, socially, and helping rebuild our community, I hope. Tahil, now to you.
First, to say inshallah to everything that you just said, Laith. Second, I also think it's unfair to go after Dana and what she just said, but I will do my best to match the energy. I will be honest and say that for me, decolonization is a daily routine that is rooted in disruption. I think a key part of why we engage in these topics that can often come off as abstract is because I think we don't know how to navigate multi-billion dollar systems, multi-billion dollar powers, all of these things that seem so humongous and complex that we cannot touch it as individuals. But the reality is, it takes people power to be able to disrupt and to be able to start changing the way that those systems function. So if you have enough people not voting, if you have enough people saying, oh, we can't change anything because everything is just corrupt, if you have people saying, oh, this has been this way for the longest time, what's the point of changing it now? Colonialism is still winning for centuries on end. And it is going to continue if we do not actually deeply discover what our power is all about. And that disruption also is deeply associated with convenience. I think a key part, coming as someone from the United States, is this constant idea that everything has to stay the same, because what if I can't eat this product? What if I can't go to this store? What if I can't celebrate these things? What if I can't go to this concert? And for us as a global superpower, it's a shame that that kind of convenience has historically been done on the backs of millions of people from around the world. And to be able to disrupt that seems like a big problem, but it's a conscious choice that needs to be made. I mean, I am speaking to people who are from Colombia, South Africa, and Palestine on this panel, three countries that can speak to the experience of what American capitalism and military industrial complex can do. And at the core of it all, it's because we are a people that don't want war in our own streets. And yet we have created injustices and perpetuated unjust systems even in our own streets, which means we constantly have to be in a fight to say, no, it has to be different. If I'm going to get things, I'm going to get it from local people. If I'm going to help people, I'm going to learn about them. And a key part of doing this work is actually being able to break the biggest cycle of what white supremacy does, which is divide and conquer. In the United States, we continue to perpetuate anti Palestinian thought, Islamophobia, anti Semitism, anti Latine support, anti Blackness, so many of those things that actually cause our own communities to be in conflict with each other. And what that ultimately does is it allows for white supremacy to thrive. So, what we have to be conscious about too is how are we searching for that compassion through solidarity with each other? How am I looking towards my colleagues in different countries and saying, hey, we actually share a struggle that we need to fight for consciously, and that the end goal can only be equity and liberation? That people can see a free Palestine, that people can see a liberated Africa where all of its countries are able to actually not feel exploited, where we can see a free Central and South America whose resources are not, exploited. And where can we consciously take, our communities that come from the global south who focus on this term that comes from Mexico, which is malinchismo, which is an active love and appreciation for everything that's foreign, and a distrust and a dislike towards our own people, and actually change that to say, no, we need to invest in us here and not try to find it from some savior that's over in another region in another part of the world, just because they've created circumstances where they have more resources and power.
Thank you for that, Tahil, and I couldn't agree more. It always has to start with us, where we are, with whatever limited resources, whatever limited capabilities we have. We have the responsibility, we have the urge, and we have the need to take that forward and to do what we can, no matter how little it may be at the time. At the end of the day, it all adds up and it all creates something beautiful that we can use. So, moving on from that and speaking kind of about Dana's experience and about all of our collective but also unique experiences, let's talk about the genocide in Palestine and how it has reignited global conversations around oppression, liberation, solidarity. So, obviously, what we have seen over the last 2 years has been a very unfortunate, sad, and unprecedented genocide, which has changed. I'll tell you personally, for me, it has changed my lives in more ways than one, and changed my lives in a way that it can never return to how it was before. My perspective on the world, my outlook, my disappointment in a lot of institutions and in a lot of people, but also my sense of hope for the future, that there is still good in the world. There are people who are still trying to help, who are trying to do whatever they can in order to develop a more fair world for the future. And based on all of that, how do you see all of these struggles, even outside of Palestine, these indigenous, decolonial, and also Palestinian struggles, as interconnected? And how can youth movements build meaningful global solidarity around these causes? So, Dana, maybe with this, we can start with you.
Yeah, okay. So I believe that the Palestinians really face a parallel story to the indigenous peoples around the world story when it comes to, fighting colonial systems that fragments their lands and denies return and erases history. Um, so shedding light first before we talk about youth movements and their right and the roles in this. I want to shed light on some statistics from Gaza. I mean, latest statistics, and I'm sorry that I'm now gonna say numbers because we're not numbers. It's each person lost has a family, has a life, has ambitions, has dreams. So even saying numbers is as if you're dehumanizing those who have lost their lives in Gaza. So unfortunately, the latest reports say that at least we're talking about more than 68,000 people who lost their lives in Gaza. That is like 1 out of 33 people in Gaza, including at least 20,000 children. So that's the cost of a war that they've not started or inflicted, when it comes to children, even or women. And these numbers are not including those who are now under the rubble yet. And of course, there were more than 170,000 people injured in Gaza, and there's more than 400 people who died out of starvation, including at least 170 people who are under the age of 18, infants and also children. And I think here comes the role of youth movements in building that kind of global solidarity. And it's not performative allyship. I mean, it has to be something powerful to kind of to really put some kind of pressure, whether it's economic pressure, whether we're talking about institutional accountability, because we have to challenge the complicity in oppression everywhere. So I would say that the role of youth movements is important. First, we can talk about education and storytelling. And as I said, as a Palestinian, when I went to an international camp in the US, political one, when I went on an exchange program in the US, I tried my best to voice my own story. And I think, as I said, people were ignorant. And at that, when I presented something related to Palestine, I told them that no, after now you've met a Palestinian. They've never met a Palestinian, by the way. Before, it was I was the only Palestinian at my host university, so I was like, okay, you were ignorant, but now no, you cannot, because this is related to you. Even if you're living, for instance, in the United States, your tax money goes to fund wars in the Middle East, to fund the ongoing unimaginable war that does not look like anything else in this history. So I would say that education and storytelling, even if you're not Palestinian, it matters. Your voice, we can amplify the voices of those who are weaker through, telling their stories, talking about their pain. And of course, there is something also related to mutual learning, which means that, for instance, movements also can learn from each other. They can take stories from each other and voice the pain of those suppressed people who do not, or who do not have the right even to talk. And of course, as I said, advocate, try to also push your governments to have some kind of pressure, whether it comes to sanctions, whether it's political, it's economic, it's any kind of pressure, anything that makes uh, the oppressor held accountable in any way. So I would say that mainly this is our role as youth from all around the world.
Thank you, Dana. And I think you said it perfectly. So there's not much I can add on that I haven't already, that I will continue to do in the future as well. I think one of the things that you said is learning from each other, basically, and helping each other and building off of that. Is we can look at, for example, South Africa as an example, and how it was South Africa who went to the ICJ, who filed a formal complaint against Israel for genocide in the ICJ, and the South African people who have stood side by side with the Palestinian people. Um, the figures from across these different times, these different histories, such as, for example, Nelson Mandela, who has an entire area named around him in Palestine. Dana might know what I'm talking about. And it's these sort of ideals and these sort of connected and shared struggles that kind of allow us to learn from each other and keep pushing each other forward and helping each other with all of that. So with that, maybe Babs, we can hear from you now.
Sure, absolutely. I keep wondering, do I keep going second because my name starts with B, the second letter of the alphabet? But I'm happy to follow. I think, Dana, a lot of what you said is so very important. And I think the South African Palestine connection is actually one that needs a little bit of time, and it, needs to really be expanded upon. There is such a deep relationship between the apartheid state and, I will say, the Israeli government. And that relationship, particularly within South Africa, is one that actually for a very long time sustained the apartheid system within South Africa. And I think it's important for us to remember that there is some form of solidarity between what was a racist, segregated state in South Africa and what exists right now in Palestine. I also think it's very appropriate that there is a word like apartheid that's being used to explain what is happening within Palestine, because it speaks not only to a system of segregation, but it speaks to primarily an economic system as well. And that's what I really want to focus on, as the role of young people. It's quite interesting. Francesca Albanese is in South Africa. She's a UN Special Rapporteur who has been reporting on what is happening within Palestine. And, she's written this really important paper that I hope every young person who's watching us, in fact, every person who's watching us will actually go and read, which speaks to, I think it's titled Economies of Occupation to the Economy of Genocide. And it speaks to the way that we are engaging within the economy and how we are using our time, our attention, and our money to support genocide in ways that we are not even aware of. And not even just genocide within Palestine, but genocide that is happening across Africa as well. And I think it's important for us as young people to really be critical about how we are spending our money, who we are supporting when we buy that burger, or when we sign up to some subscription, or when we are watching a specific streaming service. I think it's important for us to think about how we are using our time, because that is the simplest form of activism, is actually really being considerate of where you're spending your time and your money and your attention. I think also it's important for us to really think about the role of education. I think within what Dana has shared, I think it's important for us to remember that for a very long time, there was this narrative that the Israel state was fighting against a terrorist Muslim population. And for a very long time, that is the narrative that had run through society until October 7th, when we saw this horrific event take place. And then after that, even more horrific events taking place in retribution. But really, what we haven't done a really good job of is looking back at what is the history of the conflict within Palestine, and what is the history of occupation in Palestine, which rendered the events of October 7 and allow us now to see what happens when we do not question where our information comes from, where we do not question how we interrogate the information that we receive, when we don't take the time to really think about what it means to be in an occupied territory. I think it's very important for us to do that work of education. And part of that education is not just about being told numbers and dates and facts. It really is about connecting across difference. It really is about connecting with communities that are outside of our own to really understand what is happening on the ground. And that is the power that social media has offered us. It allows us to see that even though there is a huge, newsline headline that tells us that this is what's happening, that actually the stories on the ground are very much different. And the numbers that we are seeing are not just, things to be ticked off, but these are people's lives. These are people's families. These are people's children. These are their experiences and their homes, their livelihoods that are being taken away from them. And once we make education more than just numbers, we make it about the real experience of people through the work of storytelling, through the work of actually taking the time to go in and learn from people like Dana. I think that's where we start to see a shift. And so my plea to young people and the advocacy that we do is that it needs to be, number one, tangible. It's going to mean you must be uncomfortable. I think Tahil spoke about inconvenience. We must allow ourselves to be inconvenienced. We must allow ourselves to have to do the very difficult things of saying, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to participate in something that's easy for me, because what's easy for me means that someone else across the globe is suffering. And then secondly, it's really about stepping out of our own bubbles and really being committed to the stories that live far away from where we are situated. So I think those are two very important things when it comes to solidarity. And I think the last one is the power of listening. I think when we hear a community ask us to do something, it's very important for us to listen. And I think we don't do that enough as a society. We assume we know what's needed and we step in instead of actually saying, what are the Palestinian people asking for? What are the people in Goma, in DRC, asking for? What is the need that they have, and how do we meet that need instead of assuming that we know what that need is? And once that need is then is offered to us, it's our responsibility to take that up. It's our responsibility to meet that need as best as we can within our communities. So I offer that as three things to really consider for young people. It's education, it is the ability to really consider and sift through how you use your time, attention, and your money, your resources. Number three is to do the very deep work of listening.
Thank you, Babs. And I just want to say how beautiful all of those points were and how much I agree with all of them. I just wanted to add on to one of them, actually, the part about spending your money and your and how you choose to spend that, because that really clicked with me. Because I over the last few years, I've seen a lot of people who have refused to boycott different sorts of companies and establishments which invest in settlements and invest in continued apartheid and continued genocide. And they've used excuses such as, for example, well, the substitute product isn't as good as this one, or, well, I can't do this, or even if, like, what's the point, or anything of that. They've always found a way to do that. And we kind of have to always combat that and to raise more awareness about the importance of it and to kind of share that it's not just a matter of like for now or it's something that we're boycotting during the war. It also goes back to the idea of decolonizing culturally, that we should have our own culture in our products, in our different ways, that we should share that with the world. And yes, the products which cost, which have values of billions of billions and billions of dollars in their company might be better. But the reason is because we're not showing our support to our local products. We're not showing our support to those who need the that to actually develop, to actually come up with great things. And that way they're unable to actually spread that culture through the products, through the different things. So while it may not be as good as the original or the mega corporations or whatever it may be right now, it's our responsibility to actually support it to get it to that point. And we have to be well aware of that, not just of our current need and our current want for things, but where it actually leads into the future. So, Tahil, maybe we can hear from you now.
Sure, Laith. I mean, I'm just from hearing everyone, it's very clear why we're on a panel together because we are exactly on the same wavelength in a lot of ways. Um, but I think it's also clear that oftentimes, as we look at the more than 2 years of what has happened since October 7th, that this is not a conversation only of the last 2 years. It is a conversation of decades past, of histories untold, of stories left out of the narrative. That really talk about how and why we have to pay attention to the colonialism that exists and how it's able to really leave people out of the story for them to get justice. And who better to relate to that than the indigenous communities that we see around the world who continue to be displaced and have similar stories. Where I live, where I was born, this is the land of the Tongva people of this part of the United States. And their stories remain deeply untold. And they are a part of a land back process of their own, as are many other tribes in the country. And it's a larger conversation on being able to give back the land to the indigenous peoples of those areas. And that's a conversation that continues to expand, and where you see their solidarity with Palestinians. Because there are many places now where these protests are going on, and indigenous community leaders are invited, and they talk about, yes, we know the story of the Palestinians because that is our story too. And another community that relates to that really deeply is the LGBTQ community, which oftentimes people conflate as an impossibility of connection, an impossibility of solidarity, because of the tropes and the stereotypes and the assumptions that are made about how LGBTQ people are treated. And the fact of the matter is, some of the frontline people in a lot of the solidarity for Palestine and its liberation have been LGBTQ people. Because we can talk about solidarity, we can talk about liberation, and not try to sacrifice and dehumanize another set of people. um and I think it constantly comes from this idea of how in an era of modern technology we also tend to use platforms for storytelling to be able to disseminate misinformation and disinformation too. And this is where the idea of using our politics to be able to communities combat each other when they both are suffering at the hands of injustice makes this a good opportunity for us to really re-examine why these narratives are being pushed. And as someone who identifies as an openly bisexual person who has openly advocated for Palestine, I often feel that unfortunately we fall into this trap again and again of not being able to see ourselves in the other. And that's a key part of, I think, where we struggle. Um, I think oftentimes because we are given a narrative of who is friend and who is foe, who is the victor, who is the enemy. And these narratives are introduced to us as a way to be able to not be able to differentiate and pay attention to the nuance of issues that have occurred historically. And I think we have a certain responsibility to say, where, well, as an LGBTQ person, I obviously want my community to be protected. But why do you think it's okay to use my identity to say we should annihilate another group of people? That's bullshit. Sorry if you have to mute that in the recording. But quite frankly, this is where we actually see the depth of the audacity of colonization, because it allows us to constantly say, oh, well, if you want to protect yourself, then you can't be with those people because those people don't want you. And the fact of the matter is, that's not a reason to try to annihilate any group of people, period. So we have to actually re examine the ways that we rebuild these relationships to say, your humanity is intrinsically based in me, and my humanity is intrinsically based in you. And without that baseline of compassion and dignity, we cannot actually see positive, sustainable change in the world. And if I am to look at the suffering, the apartheid, the famine, the injustices that the Palestinian people have faced, a lot of people may still ask the question of, well, what about Israelis and what about the Jewish community? I don't really want them hurt either. And that should have been very clear from the get go when I said that I am a pro Palestinian. That is not at the expense of another people. That is not at the expense of their safety and their security. But you do not get to annihilate anyone in the name of the safety and security of another people, period. And we have to have a responsibility that if we're going to get closer to collective liberation, that yes, no one gets left out, but let's tell the truth for what it is when people are being sacrificed in the name of someone else's safety.
Thank you for that, Tal. And I think you're completely right, 100%. And I think it's unfortunate how the narrative right now it's being pushed that for the safety of a certain people, you have to sacrifice another people, because that is completely false and inhuman and just downright wrong. And not wrong in the sense that it's morally wrong, but wrong in the sense that when you try to annihilate another people, when you try to commit genocide against them, you're actually threatening your own safety. You're not helping the cause, you're not helping anyone. You're actually just making it less safe for yourself, because you're just spreading more hate, more death. And that will continue to happen until it stops completely, and every cause, kind of every people supports to work with each other, not to eliminate one so that they can take their place. Thank you. And Juan, finally over to you.
Yes, thank you. So, when I think about the parallels between everything that has been going on in Palestine and the relationship with it, with this, with the occupation and everything that we've been witnessing, um, I look at the history of Colombia and I see there are way too many parallels, more than I would like to count. Since the creation of the so-called State of Israel in '48, Israel and its government has been a force, a very important force in Colombian security, and not in a good sense, you know. They have, and this is not my opinion, this is fact, they have funded and they have trained and they have provided military equipment to create and to fund right-wing, extremely right-wing paramilitary groups that have displaced indigenous people, that have displaced Afro-Colombians, and that have generated countless amounts of violence throughout our history. So we are facing, in many ways, similar oppressors. And I don't even have to look so back into the history of the 20th century of Colombia. Right now, the same oppressors in terms of the fact that the United States of America, the US president, has just threatened to invade Colombia and Venezuela this week. No, this is something that we are facing right now. The parallel is immediate. And it's unfortunate that this is happening. It is very unfortunate. It is very frightening. And we are seeing this very similar tactics. We are seeing similar actors and similar ways of pushing power into the global south. And I think what we need to do is open lines of communication. Building on everything that has been said, we really need to open lines of communication between the youth. And I know that is already happening, and I think this is a wonderful space for that. But I think we need to start, reaching out to organizations and grassroots movements, because we have the opportunity to talk directly. And whenever I have done this, and I have had the opportunity to do this with colleagues from Palestine and around the world, it is so easy to understand one another. It is so easy to see the parallels of everything that is going on. And I think this is more important now than ever in terms of storytelling, in terms of understanding and communication, because now we're also facing in Colombia this narrative that people who oppose whatever the Trump administration is doing are narco-terrorists, and they're dehumanizing us who are not agreeing with this. And it is certainly, we need the solidarity, and we need these lines of direct communication so that we can talk beyond the narrative fog of traditional media and the misinformation, so that we can remain in touch, so that we can do not get distorted into the information that we get, and we can still remain solid in solidarity with one another with everything that is happening. Because these offensives, we're unfortunately facing a wave of ultra nationalism and right-wing movements across the world, and we need to be connected with one another through stories, but by setting up these lines of communications and strengthening them for whenever they are needed. So that is something that I would really like to point out at this point. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Juan, and thank you for sharing all of that. It's really insightful, and it was great to hear about your experience through all of that, and especially, unfortunately, even the continued aggressiveness of colonization until now, and how you're right, we do have to all to come together for all of that and more. Unfortunately, we have gone over time, and it's come to the end of our panel discussion. I think a panel like this might have gone on for days, even, just so that we could discuss a few of the other points that we had, some of the stories that we all have. I just have to say, for myself personally, I had very high expectations for this panel, and it's even surpassed my expectations that I had. So that's because of you guys. It was an honor to moderate the panel, to listen to all of you, to share in your experiences. And I can't wait to see what all of you are going to bring to the future of our world, and how you're all going to work to make it a better place. And I'm very fortunate just to be here to see that firsthand right now. So thank you for that. And it was great to have you guys, to speak with you, and for to have you guys share that with everyone here.